You never forget the moment someone finally sees your worth, when it's already too late. I remember the night it happened. The quiet hum of the city outside my window, the same streetlights that once glowed through our laughter, now blurred through my tears. My phone buzzed again and again, his name lighting up the screen. For a second, I almost answered. Almost. But I didn't. Because I'd waited too many nights before, and silence had become my only answer left to give. People talk about heartbreak like it happens once, one grand, dramatic moment. But heartbreak, I learned, dies in pieces. Slowly. Quietly. The way he stopped noticing when I dressed up. The way his I love yous turned into I'm busy. The way my smile became something I had to rehearse in the mirror. And every time I asked him, "Are we okay?" he'd sigh, like love itself had become an inconvenience. I stayed. Because love makes you stubborn. You keep believing maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe he'll look at you and remember who you were to him. But tomorrow kept coming, and his eyes stayed empty. And that's the cruelest thing about love, it doesn't break all at once. It fades, until one day, you realize you're the only one fighting to keep it alive. That night, when his calls came, I could almost hear my old self whisper, "Answer him. Just one more time." But the woman I'd become was done begging to be seen. So, I let the phone ring, until silence swallowed everything we used to be. And for the first time in years, I chose myself. But even now, sometimes at 2 a.m., when the world feels too quiet, I wonder. Was it strength, or was it pride? I thought walking away would give me peace. It didn't. Peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from being understood. And he never understood me. Not when I cried quietly beside him. Not when I laughed just to make him stay. Not even when I walked away with shaking hands. The days after leaving felt strange. My apartment still smelled like him, his cologne clinging to my pillows, the ghost of his laughter echoing in the corners. I'd make coffee for 2 out of habit, then stare at the empty chair across from me. People told me I'd done the right thing. That self-respect mattered more than love. But they didn't see me at night, tracing old photos, replaying his voice messages, wishing I could stop caring before my heart remembered how. Sometimes regret doesn't scream. It just sits beside you in silence, watching you pretend you're fine. He didn't reach out again after that night. Weeks passed. Months, maybe. I started working late, avoiding places we used to go. But life has a cruel sense of humor, because the more I tried to forget, the more the world kept reminding me of him. A song on the radio. A jacket that looked like his. The sound of someone saying his name too casually. And then one morning, I got his message. Just 3 words. I miss you. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I finally realized. He missed me now that I wasn't his anymore. Now that my absence spoke louder than my love ever did. And in that moment, something inside me shattered again, not from sadness, but from the cruel truth that he had to lose me to finally see me. It's strange, isn't it? How someone's apology can arrive too late to matter. When he said he missed me, I didn't feel the warmth I once craved. I felt hollow. Like the words had traveled too far, across too much silence, to mean anything real anymore. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I finally understood that closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you create when you stop waiting for answers. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below like forgotten stars. The same city where we'd built our little world, promises scribbled on napkins, laughter echoing between rain and midnight coffee runs. And yet, it all felt like someone else's story now. I replayed our last argument in my mind, the one that ended it all. He said, "You've changed." And I remember whispering back, "You never noticed I had to." It wasn't anger I felt back then. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from trying to hold together something that no longer wants to be held. The next morning, I deleted his message. No drama, no goodbye. Just delete. And in that small act, I felt both free and broken at the same time. They never tell you how heavy freedom feels when it comes wrapped in loss. I thought I'd finally moved on. But every quiet night still carried his echo. Every reflection still asked me if I'd done the right thing. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling at a memory, only to feel the sting of tears right after, because nostalgia is cruel like that. It lets you relive happiness you can never touch again. And yet, deep down, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't the girl waiting for him anymore. I was the woman learning how to live without needing to be seen. Months passed. The pain didn't vanish, it just learned how to breathe beside me. I found new routines. A new coffee place. New songs that didn't remind me of him. But healing, it's not a straight line. It's circles. You revisit the same memories until one day, they stop hurting as much. One afternoon, I ran into one of his friends at the grocery store. He looked surprised, said I looked different. And I guess I did. I had that calmness you earn only after walking through fire. He told me my ex wasn't doing well. Said he was quiet these days. Lost, even. I just nodded. Because what could I say? That I'd already cried his tears long before he learned what losing me felt like? That night, I got home and found myself standing in front of the mirror. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't heartbroken anymore. She was tired, maybe. But stronger. And there was a softness in her eyes again, the kind that comes from forgiving someone, not for their sake, but for your own peace. I whispered to my reflection. He finally knows what I felt all those nights I cried alone. And a tear slipped down my cheek, not out of sadness, but because life has a way of teaching through loss what love could never explain. The next morning, I watched the sunrise, the sky painted in colors that once meant nothing to me. And for the first time, I didn't think of him. Not even once. Healing doesn't announce itself. It just slips quietly into your life when you stop counting the days since they left. I remember that morning vividly, the light coming through the curtains, soft and golden, touching everything it fell on. I stood by the window, holding my coffee, realizing I hadn't thought about him in weeks. That realization didn't bring joy. It brought peace, the kind that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. I started doing little things just for myself again. Reading. Painting. Taking long walks without looking at my phone. And yet, every so often, a song or scent would pull me back, not into sadness, but into reflection. I'd smile at the memory, like looking through an old photograph. The pain had softened. It was still there, but quieter, like a background hum you learn to live with. Then one evening, out of nowhere, his name appeared on my screen again. Not a message this time. A call. My heart paused. My fingers trembled. I didn't answer. Instead, I just stared at his name glowing on my phone, realizing how much power I once gave to something so small. When the call ended, a voice message followed. His tone was low, heavy, almost unfamiliar. He said, "I get it now. I really do. You were everything, and I was too blind to see it." There was a pause, the kind that carries years of regret. Then he whispered, "I just hope you're happy." I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat there in silence, letting his voice drift through the air like smoke from a candle long blown out. Because what he didn't realize was that the woman he was apologizing to no longer existed. I had changed. And sometimes, change is the quiet revenge of those who were once ignored. It's strange how life works. You spend months wishing someone would understand your pain, and when they finally do, you've already outgrown the need for their understanding. Days turned into weeks again, and I kept living. But part of me, the quiet part that still cared, wondered what he was doing now. Did he wake up missing me the way I once missed him? Did he drive past our favorite places and feel that ache in his chest, that pull of memory? I told myself it didn't matter. Yet every now and then, I'd dream about him. Not the man he became, but the one I first fell in love with. The one who made me laugh until my stomach hurt. The one who held my hand like I was his whole world. Dreams have no concept of endings. They just bring back what reality took away. One night, in one of those dreams, he looked at me and said, "I finally see you." And I woke up crying, not because of him, but because I knew he never really would. That was the night I stopped waiting for his closure and started creating my own. I wrote a letter, not to send, just to let everything out. I wrote about love, pride, and all the versions of myself that had to die to survive him. When I finished, I burned it. Watched the ashes float away like tiny pieces of my past finally letting go. And as the smoke rose into the night sky, I whispered, "You were my lesson, not my ending." There's something poetic about learning peace after pain. The kind of peace that doesn't shout or sparkle, it just exists. Like quiet waves returning to shore, after a storm that once destroyed everything. I had stopped looking for him in other people. Stopped comparing laughter, stopped scanning faces for familiarity. When I walked through the city, I didn't see ghosts anymore, only moments waiting to be lived. Still, there were nights when I'd sit by the window, listening to the rain, and wonder how differently things might have gone if ego hadn't stood between us. He was proud. And so was I. Maybe that's what killed us, not the lack of love, but the refusal to be the first to bend. Sometimes I'd replay our last conversation, his voice sharp, mine trembling, both of us saying things we didn't mean just to protect our pride. I used to think regret came from loving too much. Now I know it comes from not loving enough when we had the chance. Months later, I saw him again. By accident. A crowded cafe downtown. He was sitting by the window, same coffee, same half-smile, looking out at nothing. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. The weight in his posture. The loneliness in his eyes. He looked like someone still trying to find the version of himself I once believed in. For a moment, I wanted to walk over. To say something, anything. But then I realized, some stories lose their magic when you try to rewrite them. So, I just smiled faintly, turned away, and left. The door chimed softly behind me, like the world itself closing a chapter I'd been stuck in for too long. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. It just felt finished. Closure doesn't always come from words. Sometimes, it's in that silent goodbye you whisper only to yourself. After that day, life began to feel lighter. I started noticing small joys again, the smell of morning rain, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the laughter of strangers that didn't remind me of anyone. I wasn't waiting for happiness to return. I was creating it, one quiet moment at a time. And then, out of nowhere, I received a letter. No sender name, just handwriting I could never forget. His. I hesitated before opening it. My heart wasn't racing like it used to. It was calm and curious, maybe, but not desperate. Inside, there was no apology, no begging for another chance. Just a few lines. He wrote, "I finally understand what you meant when you said love is more than words. You were right. I hope you found what you were looking for." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in my journal. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. Some people come into your life to love you. Others come to teach you what love shouldn't feel like. That night, I sat outside under the stars and felt something I hadn't in years, gratitude. Not for losing him, but for finding myself through the loss. Gratitude. It's such a simple word, yet it took me years to feel it honestly. There was a time when I hated him for leaving me empty, for making me doubt my worth. But now, I saw it differently. Sometimes, pain isn't a punishment, it's a lesson in disguise. It teaches you where your boundaries end and where your self-love begins. I started traveling, not far, just enough to breathe somewhere new. Each place felt like a new version of myself. By the ocean, I learned to let go. In the mountains, I learned silence could be healing. And in the crowd of strangers, I realized loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about being misunderstood. One evening, I found myself writing again, something I hadn't done since him. Not letters. Just thoughts. Feelings. Words that didn't need to be read by anyone but me. And it felt freeing. It felt like my heart was finally unclenching after holding on for too long. But life has its quiet ironies. Just when I thought the past was done testing me, I saw him again. This time, not by accident. He was standing at a friend's wedding, just a few feet away, wearing the same nervous smile that once melted me. For a second, our eyes met. The room faded. It wasn't love. It wasn't anger either. It was recognition, two souls who once danced in the same fire, now standing in the ashes of what used to be. He nodded. I nodded back. No words. No tears. Just understanding. And that was enough. Because I finally realized, forgiveness doesn't mean you want them back. It means you're finally at peace with what never was. That night, back in my room, I looked through the old photos I hadn't deleted. Not to cry, but to remember. Every smile, every tear, every fight had built the woman I had become. And for once, I didn't wish to erase a single moment. I whispered softly to the empty room. You were my heartbreak, but also my awakening. Life moved quietly after that. I stopped measuring time by the distance since he left. I started sleeping without replaying conversations in my head. And when people asked if I was over him, I'd smile, because the truth was, I wasn't sure over was the right word. I hadn't forgotten him. I had just forgiven both of us for not knowing better. Some nights, I'd still think of how different things could have been if we had just talked instead of argued, listened instead of defended, stayed instead of proved points. But regret doesn't rewrite endings. It only teaches you how to begin again, softer, wiser, and quieter. I wasn't searching for love anymore. I was learning how to be love. How to offer kindness without fear. How to protect my heart without closing it off. Because maybe that's what healing truly is. Not forgetting who broke you, but remembering who you became because of it. Time kept moving, quietly, relentlessly, the way it always does after the noise of heartbreak fades. I built a new life, not out of grand plans, but out of small, gentle routines. Morning walks. Evening tea. Reading poetry under soft lamplight. The kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but just slips into your soul one slow breath at a time. Sometimes, I'd pass by familiar places, the cafe we loved, the park bench where we once sat for hours. But instead of pain, I felt nostalgia. The kind that doesn't sting anymore, it just exists, like an old scar that no longer hurts when you touch it. Friends began to notice the change in me. They said my smile looked real again. Maybe it was. Maybe because I had finally stopped searching for someone else to give me closure. Maybe because I had finally learned that love doesn't always end in togetherness, sometimes it ends in self-discovery. One night, as I watched the city lights flicker from my balcony, I caught myself whispering, I hope he's okay. And I meant it. Not from longing, but from grace. Because you know you've healed when your heart can wish well on the person who once broke it. I realized then that love doesn't die, it transforms. It changes shape, becomes gentler, quieter, less about possession and more about peace. And in that silence, I finally heard something I'd missed all along. My own voice. The one I'd silenced for years trying to be what someone else needed. That voice was calm now, wiser, steadier, whispering. You were never too much. He was just not ready for someone whole. Years passed. Seasons changed. And one ordinary afternoon, I received an unexpected message from him. It was short, almost hesitant. He wrote, "I'm getting married. I just wanted to thank you for everything." I stared at those words for a long time. And to my surprise, I smiled. Not because I was overjoyed, but because I genuinely felt nothing heavy. No pain. No bitterness. Just quiet acceptance. I typed a simple reply. "I'm happy for you. Take care." And that was it. No lingering what-ifs. No ache. Just a chapter finally closing the way it was always meant to, gently. After that, I went for a walk, the air crisp and full of life. People rushed past me, laughter echoing from somewhere nearby. And I realized how far I'd come, from the girl who waited for calls that never came, to the woman who no longer needed them. Love didn't break me. It built me piece by painful piece, into someone I finally recognized. And that night, as I lay in bed, the last thought that crossed my mind was simple but profound. Maybe losing him was the only way I could finally find myself. It's funny how endings used to terrify me. Back then, I believed every goodbye meant failure, every loss meant something was wrong with me. But time and pain have a way of reshaping your understanding of love. Now, I see endings differently. They're not punishments, they're redirections. Gentle pushes from the universe saying, "You've learned what you needed. It's time to go." I started noticing beauty in the smallest things again, the hum of rain against my window, strangers holding hands, the way sunlight touched old buildings like forgiveness. And sometimes, in those quiet moments, I'd think of him, not as the man who broke me, but as someone who once taught me what I never want to forget, that love without respect is just attachment dressed as passion. One evening, I visited the seaside, our old place. The sky was painted in soft orange and violet, the waves whispering secrets to the sand. I stood there barefoot, letting the tide wash over my feet, and whispered his name to the wind, one last time. Not to call him back, but to release what was left of him inside me. The sea didn't answer, of course. But somehow, it felt like it did, in the rhythm of the waves, in the way they carried my silence out to the horizon. And standing there, I realized something. Healing isn't about erasing someone from your story. It's about learning to read your life without them on every page. That night, I went home lighter than I'd been in years. And as I looked out the window at the city glowing below, I whispered, "I hope you found your peace, because I finally found mine." Peace is a strange thing. It doesn't mean everything is perfect, it means you've made peace with the imperfections. And I had. Life wasn't magical or cinematic anymore. It was simple, quiet, and real. And somehow, that simplicity felt more beautiful than any love story I'd ever lived. One rainy afternoon, I sat in a bookstore, flipping through a novel when a stranger approached me. He smiled and said, "You look like someone who's seen the world differently." I laughed, softly, unsure what he meant. He wasn't wrong, though. I had seen the world differently, through heartbreak, through silence, through the slow rebuilding of myself. We talked for hours that day. About music, life, small things that made us feel human again. And as I listened to his laughter, something stirred, not the desperate kind of love that once consumed me, but something gentler, steadier. When I left that day, he asked, "Can I see you again?" And for the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate. I smiled and said, "Maybe." Because I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of love. Not of loss. I'd finally learned that hearts don't break to stay broken, they break to make room for something truer. Maybe. That one word carried all the strength I'd earned through years of pain and silence. I didn't owe anyone certainty anymore, not even myself. I had learned to let things unfold without forcing them, to trust that what's meant for me will never require me to lose myself again. He and I began to see each other often. Slowly. Naturally. There were no fireworks, no grand promises, just two people learning to exist without pretense. He listened when I spoke, and in his silence, I didn't feel invisible. That was new. That was healing. One night, we sat on a park bench under the stars. He looked at me and said, "You seem like someone who's loved deeply, and been hurt deeply too." I smiled, because he wasn't wrong. But I didn't flinch from the truth anymore. Pain had shaped me, yes, but it hadn't hardened me. It had refined me. We talked until the sky began to lighten. No confessions, no labels, just an unspoken understanding that we were both survivors of our own storms. When he walked me home, he didn't try to hold my hand. He didn't have to. Sometimes, respect feels more intimate than touch. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of how far I'd come, from waiting for apologies that never came, to living without needing them. And I realized something beautiful. Love isn't about filling an emptiness. It's about sharing fullness. Weeks turned into months, and I began to notice how quiet my heart had become. Not empty, just at peace. He was gentle, patient, never asking for more than I could give. We built something simple, laughter over morning coffee, shared glances in crowded places, comfort in silence. But one evening, as we watched the sunset together, he asked softly, "Do you ever still think about him?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally did. "Sometimes," I said. "But not the way I used to. Now I just hope he's happy. That's all." He nodded, understanding without judgment. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't erased my past. I'd simply outgrown it. The woman who once begged to be seen now stood tall, loved, and whole. Not because someone fixed her, but because she stopped breaking herself for anyone else. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he reached out and took my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. Because this wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about honoring what I'd learned. And somewhere between the fading light and his quiet warmth beside me, I whispered to myself, "Maybe love doesn't always hurt when you finally love right." We stayed like that until the sky turned from gold to gray, two silhouettes against a world that kept moving. There was no urgency anymore, no fear of losing what hadn't yet begun. I'd spent years believing love needed to be loud, consuming, chaotic. But this time, it was soft. It didn't demand, didn't rush, it simply existed, like breath. Days turned into patterns. Small moments stitched together, laughter in the kitchen, coffee stains on our favorite books, quiet drives with the windows down. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real was enough. Still, sometimes late at night, I'd find myself awake, not sad, just reflective. Because even healed hearts carry memories. And I realized, I didn't hate my past anymore. In fact, I was grateful. If I hadn't lost him, I might never have found me. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the glass, I looked at the man sitting beside me reading, smiling quietly, and thought, this is what love should have always felt like. Peaceful. Unforced. Honest. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself. He finally realized my worth, but I was already gone. Not with bitterness. Not as a wound. But as a truth I had made peace with. Because I had finally become the woman I used to beg someone else to see. Months later, I received one last message from my past, a short note from him. It said, I saw you today. You looked happy. I'm glad you found what I couldn't give you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories deserve to end in silence, the kind that speaks louder than words ever could. That night, I sat outside under a blanket of stars, thinking about how life always comes full circle. He once made me question my worth, and now his words confirmed it. Not because he said I looked happy, but because I was. I closed my eyes and smiled. For once, there was no ache, no regret. Only gratitude. Love had taught me everything, how to break, how to rebuild, and how to rise without resentment. And though I would never forget the woman who once cried herself to sleep, I'd honor her, because she was the reason I now slept in peace. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't walking away. It's becoming everything they thought you never could be, without needing them to see it. And as the wind whispered through the night, I finally understood. Some endings aren't tragic. They're just quiet beginnings in disguise. I woke up that morning to sunlight spilling through the curtains, soft, golden, almost gentle. The world outside looked peaceful, as if it didn't remember the storms that had once torn me apart. I sat by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watched life move quietly on the street below. Children laughed, a dog barked, someone waved from across the road, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider watching it all from behind glass. I was living again. Healing had come so slowly I hadn't even noticed it at first. It didn't arrive like a lightning strike or a grand revelation. It came in fragments, mornings when I didn't check my phone, evenings when I didn't replay old conversations, moments when silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. I began filling my days with little things, reading, painting, cooking meals just for myself. I learned to enjoy my own company, something I used to dread. There were times I caught myself smiling for no reason, and that startled me. Happiness had become unfamiliar, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. But it returned piece by piece, softening the sharp edges of who I'd become. I even began to forgive him, not because he asked for it, but because carrying anger felt heavier than the heartbreak itself. I realized forgiveness wasn't about him at all. It was about me choosing peace over pain. It was about saying, I survived what tried to destroy me. And that quiet truth, that I had survived, became my strength. Weeks later, I revisited our old cafe. The same one where everything began and ended. I hadn't planned to go there, I just happened to walk by, and something pulled me in. The bell above the door still chimed the same way. The smell of coffee hit me, bitter and sweet, just like our story. I sat at the same corner table, tracing my fingers along the scratched wood, and smiled faintly at the memory of us sitting there years ago, younger, foolish, certain we had forever. As I sat there, a strange calm washed over me. There was no sting, no longing, just quiet understanding. I realized that not all beautiful things are meant to last. Some exist only to teach us how to love, how to lose, and how to begin again. And maybe that was enough. Later that night, I stood by the mirror, looking at the person I had become. My reflection felt unfamiliar yet comforting, like meeting someone I used to know but hadn't truly seen in years. There were faint lines around my eyes, small signs of all the nights I'd spent crying, thinking, regretting. But behind them, there was something new, peace. I wasn't chasing anyone's validation anymore. I wasn't trying to prove I was worthy of being loved. For the first time, I was enough for myself. I whispered into the silence, "You did your best." And somehow, those words healed me more than any apology ever could. Because I had loved deeply, maybe foolishly, but with everything I had. And that wasn't something to regret. That was something to be proud of. Not everyone has the courage to love that way, to stay soft in a world that teaches you to harden after heartbreak. I thought about all the things I once blamed myself for, not being enough, not saying the right words, not staying longer. But the truth was, love doesn't fail because of one person's flaws. It fails because sometimes, two hearts grow in different directions, and no amount of trying can force them to meet again. And I finally stopped asking why. I stopped searching for meaning in pain and started finding it in peace. That night, as I turned off the lights, I realized something simple yet profound: closure doesn't come from someone returning. It comes from deciding you no longer need them to. Months passed, and life quietly unfolded in ways I never expected. I moved to a new city, somewhere by the coast where the air smelled like salt and freedom. I'd spend hours walking along the shoreline, letting the waves erase my footprints just as time had softened my scars. Every sunset felt like a small goodbye to the past, and every sunrise whispered a promise of something new. Sometimes I'd see couples walking hand in hand, laughing, and instead of sadness, I felt hope. I didn't envy them anymore, I simply wished they'd never take it for granted. I had once held something beautiful, and though it slipped away, I was grateful I'd felt it at all. Maybe love wasn't meant to last forever. Maybe it was meant to teach us forever. And in that realization, I finally smiled. One evening, as I sat watching the sea melt into the horizon, my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen, the same name I once waited months to see. For a moment, time froze. My hands trembled slightly, caught between curiosity and calm. I opened the message. It was simple, "I've been thinking about you. I'm sorry." For years, I had imagined this moment, the apology, the regret, the acknowledgement that he'd lost something real. But now that it was here, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was no rush of satisfaction, no triumphant relief. Just quiet acceptance. I didn't hate him. I didn't love him either. I had simply outgrown the version of myself that needed closure from him. I typed back slowly, "It's okay. I hope you found peace." Then I put my phone down and looked back at the sea. The waves kept moving, indifferent to everything we humans break and rebuild. I realized that life never pauses for regret. It flows endlessly, patiently, waiting for us to learn how to let go. And maybe letting go wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about remembering without pain, about smiling at the memories instead of mourning them. That night, I walked home under a sky full of stars. Each one felt like a silent reminder that endings aren't failures, they're transformations. It's strange how life circles back, not to reopen wounds, but to show how well they've healed. I met someone months later, kind, patient, gentle in ways that didn't demand my love but earned it quietly. He didn't try to fill the silence, he respected it. He didn't ask about my past, he simply held my hand and walked beside me through the present. And that's when I understood, real love doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't promise forever, it just shows up and stays, softly. Sometimes, I still think about the man I once loved, not with pain, but with gratitude. He was the storm that taught me to find peace. The mistake that led me to myself. The silence that made me listen to my own heart. So when people ask if I ever found closure, I smile and say, I didn't need to. I found something better, I found me. Maybe that's what life really is, a collection of moments we never get back, and lessons we never forget. Some people come to love us, some come to break us, and a rare few come to teach us who we are when everything falls apart. If you're listening to this right now, wondering if they ever regret losing you, stop. Because one day, you'll wake up, look in the mirror, and realize they were never your closure. You were. This was Silent Regrets. And sometimes, silence says everything.